She ran to the fence, barefoot, breathless, screaming, "Mama!" On the other side, a woman dropped her shovel, frozen. Her hands trembled, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then behind the girl, a figure stepped forward. A man cloaked in fur, eyes like winter stone. A warrior. The man the woman thought had died 10 winters ago. "Mama, it's him," the girl whispered. "The one from my dreams." In that instant, the world stood still. A child once thrown into the snow like she was nothing. A mother imprisoned for loving the wrong man. A father who never knew he had a daughter. This isn't just survival. It's blood that remembers. Of love torn apart by war and what happened when fate gave them one last chance to become a family. The wind clawed through the trees like it had teeth. Snow fell thick and hard in the Appalachian wilderness, 1851, so heavy it blurred the world into shades of white and gray. The wagon train moved like ghosts through the storm, creaking over frozen ground, horses staggering under thin blankets and thinner loads. At the very back of the train, a woman knelt beside a child. "Please," she whispered, brushing frost from the girl's forehead. "She just needs more time." Lena, only 8, lay curled under a threadbare quilt, her skin flushed red with fever. Her lips were cracked, her eyes barely fluttered. She didn't speak. She didn't move. In her tiny hand, she gripped a scrap of red wool, a scarf once wrapped around her mother's neck. It was all she had left. A man stepped forward. He wore thick fur around his shoulders, his beard crusted with ice. His face showed no softness. "We're down to 1 barrel of grain," he said flatly, "and she's not getting better." "She's just a child," the woman begged. "Her mother died trusting us to bring her. She made her choice, siding with the Shawnee. We owe her nothing." He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply reached down, lifted Lena in his arms, light as kindling, and carried her toward the snowbank. "No, wait!" The woman reached for the child's hand, but another settler held her back. Lena didn't cry out. Her body was too weak. The snow touched her skin like ice on fire. The man laid her down gently, almost respectfully, but his eyes remained cold. "She'll fall asleep," he muttered. "She won't feel it." Then he turned and walked away. The wagons rolled forward, wheels cracked over ice, hooves kicked up slush, voices vanished into the white, and Lena lay still, the storm slowly bearing her. Above her, the wind howled like a woman in mourning. She drifted in and out of fevered dreams, of warm arms, mint-scented hands, her mother singing lullabies by firelight. The red scarf in her hand was damp with melted snow, but she held on. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered, "Mama, I'll live." No one heard her. The sky pressed lower. The world closed over her like a lid on a coffin. And still, she held the red scarf like it was her last breath. The snow had muffled everything. Sound, scent, even thought. It was the kind of silence that felt sacred and dangerous all at once. Tekoa moved like shadow through the forest. The wounded deer he had been tracking had veered north along a ridge, its prints shallow and stuttering. Hunger gnawed at his gut, but he moved with the patience of a man used to waiting. Each breath clouded in front of him, slow and steady, bow across his back, blade at his hip, alone, just as he had been for years. That's when he saw it, a shape in the snow, curled like a sleeping fox. He slowed, crouched low behind a fallen log, squinting through the snow flurries. At first it looked like a doll, discarded, maybe left behind by settlers. But as he crept closer, he realized it wasn't a doll at all. It was a child, a girl, Lena. Her lips were blue. Her breath, if present at all, was thin mist. Her cheeks were fevered crimson against the stark white snow. Her hand clutched a torn strip of red wool like it was stitched to her bones. Tekoa's first instinct was to step back. It could be a trap. Whites had used worse to lure his kind before. But something in him wavered. He leaned in, gently brushing the wet, matted hair from her cheek. That's when he saw it. Behind her left ear, beneath tangled curls and half-melted snow, was a mark. Faint but unmistakable. A teardrop, dark and precise, etched by blood at birth. His breath hitched. He had that same mark, the same place, the same shape. His fingers went to his own neck, brushing the skin beneath his collar, as if to confirm it hadn't vanished. It couldn't be. Years ago, there had been a woman, Isolde. Her laughter had smelled of pine and mint. She'd whispered to him once, hands trembling beneath the stars, "If it's true, if there's life inside me, will you still walk away?" He had walked. And now, this? The child stirred, her lips parting, breath shallow. "Mama," she whispered. Tekoa blinked. Then, without another thought, he shrugged off his buffalo hide cloak and wrapped it gently around her tiny body. She was light, frighteningly so, as he lifted her into his arms. Her limbs hung like willow branches. Her skin radiated heat and cold at once. He stood there for a moment, staring down the trail. The wagon tracks were already gone, snow swallowing them whole. Turning away from the path of the settlers, Tekoa disappeared back into the forest, toward his fire, toward his exile, toward something he didn't yet understand but couldn't ignore. He did not pray, he did not speak, but deep in his chest, something ancient stirred. Not memory, not guilt, but something even older. Recognition. The fire crackled low in the center of the lodge, its embers casting long shadows along the hide walls. Snow piled thick outside, pressing against the seams of the structure like a second skin. The wind groaned through the trees, but inside it was warm, barely but enough. Lena lay still beneath layers of buffalo hide. Her cheeks burned crimson, lips dry, breath uneven. The fever clung to her like a spirit that refused to let go. Tekoa sat cross-legged beside her, grinding dried roots with a stone mortar. Bitters, pine bark, wild sage. The scent rose like memory. These were his grandmother's recipes, drawn from earth and fire, passed down in quiet moments over open flame. He soaked a cloth in snow, then pressed it gently to her forehead. She stirred but did not wake. Behind him, voices murmured. "She should not be here," said the eldest of the tribe. "She is not one of us." "She is what the white men left behind," another muttered. "They will come looking." Tekoa didn't respond. He didn't turn. His hands moved steadily, grinding, stirring, pouring hot water over the herbs until the steam curled toward the ceiling like smoke from a memory he couldn't name. He ladled the tea into a wooden bowl and touched it to her lips. She drank a few drops, wincing. Then her eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. She stared up at him, glassy and unfocused. "Are you my father?" she whispered. The words cut deeper than the cold outside. Tekoa didn't answer. He reached instead for a small feather, dark brown with pale streaks, taken from a hawk he'd buried the previous winter. He tied it gently into her hair, using a strip of bark fiber, careful not to disturb her fevered sleep. To outsiders, it was just a gesture, but to the Shawnee, it meant something far more sacred. She was claimed, not by blood, but by spirit, not abandoned, but chosen. Tekoa sat back, watching the fire reflect in her skin. She was fragile, burning, lost. And yet something in her had survived where others would not. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or whether the fever would break, but tonight he would not leave her. "Not again," Lena murmured in her sleep. Tekoa leaned in from his place beside the fire, sharpening a bone hook. Her lips moved softly, barely audible, her breath ragged from the fever still clinging to her lungs. "She had kind eyes," the girl mumbled. "She sang through the fence." He paused. "Fence?" His eyes narrowed. He set the bone aside and watched her closer. "She was behind barbed. She called me, said my name." Lena stirred, clutching the red scarf tighter to her chest. Her brow furrowed, as if trying to remember something too big for her small body to carry. And suddenly, the past rose like smoke. Years ago, 10, maybe more, Tekoa had been pulled from the blood-stained snow after a skirmish near the frontier. Wounded, alone, and hunted, he had collapsed behind a small chapel near a settler town. He had expected to die, but she had found him. Isolde. She was a nurse, white, unafraid. Her hands were steady and her voice, soft as mountain wind, told him not to move. She'd stitched his wound by lantern light, hiding him beneath the floorboards of the clinic for 3 nights. Not once did she ask for thanks. She had simply said, "I'll keep you breathing. The rest is up to the spirits." After he healed, he had left without a word. But he came back. Once, Then again, and again, always under cover of darkness, always in silence. They met in hidden places, by rivers, in caves, under trees that remembered no names. She laughed rarely, but when she did, it sounded like something he had never known he missed. He never asked her to follow. She never asked him to stay. And then, one night she had whispered, "If I ever carry a child, will you come back for us?" Tekoa had looked away. There had been too much blood behind him and too much danger ahead. He never saw her again. Now, watching Lena, her tiny body curled beneath his cloak, murmuring about fences and lullabies, his throat closed. The past didn't just whisper, it screamed. Could she be? He reached toward her but stopped short of touching her cheek. Instead, he turned to the fire and added more wood. Sparks leapt into the air like memories trying to escape the dark. Outside, the wind howled against the lodge. Inside, a man who had once run from love now sat frozen in its shadow. The fever broke, but Lena's eyes still held shadows. She was quieter now, but not calm, like a storm had passed through her soul and left only silence behind. Each night, as Tekoa tended the fire, she would whisper fragments from her dreams. Of a woman behind a fence, a red roof, hands reaching through iron bars. "She's waiting for me," she said one evening, her voice small. "My mama." Tekoa shook his head. "That place is far and dangerous." "I know," Lena said, curling deeper under the hide. "But she's there." He didn't respond. But later that night, just before sleep took her, she whispered, barely loud enough to reach him, "Don't let me die like Mama." He sat motionless, the words striking him deeper than any blade. At dawn, he packed. He tied bundles of dried meat, filled a flask with boiled water, rolled the buffalo hide, and packed her few things with care. She blinked awake as he tightened the last strap. "Where are we going?" she asked, still groggy. Tekoa slung his bow over his shoulder. "To find her." They traveled for days, through snow so thick it muffled the world, across rivers frozen into silence, past the eyes of wolves glinting from the dark, watching but never striking. Each night, Tekoa built shelters of pine boughs and bark. He gave Lena the driest spot, the warmest blanket, and when the cold crept in too deep, he pulled her close, sharing the heat of his own body. One night, as snow fell soft and steady, Lena looked up at the stars. "Do you think she'll remember me?" Tekoa didn't answer. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, "I never forgot you." On the fifth day, they reached the ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley, sat a prison camp, bleak and fenced, with smoke curling from blackened chimneys. A splash of red roof stood stark against the snow. "There," Lena said, pointing with a trembling finger. "She's in there. I saw it in my dreams." Tekoa narrowed his eyes. The cold no longer stung. The ache in his legs disappeared. Only the fire in his chest remained. Dusk bled across the valley like ink in snow. The sky, once silver and cold, now deepened to violet and bruised gold. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the prison camp below, rising like breath from buried ghosts. Lena stood beside Tekoa, her gloved hand gripping his. From their hiding spot behind a thicket of scrub, they watched the camp in silence. Then, without warning, Lena stepped forward. "Wait!" Tekoa started, but she was already running. Down the slope, through the thin crust of snow, toward the fence. "Ma! Ma!" she cried, voice breaking. "Mama!" Inside the camp, a line of women shoveled snow along the barracks wall. One woman paused mid-motion, her shoulders stiff. She turned slowly. Isolde. Her eyes locked onto the small figure pressing against the iron bars, wrapped in buffalo hide and trembling from head to toe. "Lena," she breathed. The shovel slipped from her hand. She stumbled forward, nearly falling, until her hands gripped the bars from the inside. "Lena, my baby, my baby!" Lena reached through, tears streaming down her cheeks. Their fingers touched, skin to skin, across cold metal. Breath hitched. Time stopped. Behind them, the world fell silent, and then Tekoa stepped forward. Isolde's head lifted. Her body froze, as if the breath had been ripped from her lungs. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The man she had once believed dead stood only paces away, older now, leaner, face lined by seasons, but eyes unchanged, deep and dark and steady as ever. Takoa, she whispered, as if saying his name might undo the years between them. He moved closer, stopping just beside Lena. His hand came to rest gently on the girl's shoulder. I found her, he said, voice rough. Isolde's lips parted, but no words came. Her fingers trembled on the bars. Lena looked from one face to the other. You know each other? Neither answered, but something passed between them, ancient, unspoken, and heavy with memory. Tears slid down Isolde's face. Her free hand rose slowly to cover her mouth, but not before a quiet sob slipped past. And in that still moment, beneath the bruised sky, behind the iron fence, with snow falling like ash from a quiet heaven, a mother, a father, and a child found each other again. Night fell sharp and soundless over the camp. The watchtower torches flickered low, guards pacing with bored footsteps and fogged breath. Inside a dim supply shed near the women's barracks, a figure waited, barely a shadow among crates and rope. Benji, no longer the boy Takoa had once pulled from a swollen river, but a young man, nervous and wide-eyed, draped in a soldier's coat too big for his shoulders. You remember me, Takoa said softly. Benji nodded. You saved me. Takoa looked toward the barracks. I need your help now. Benji hesitated. If they catch me, they won't. Silence stretched. Then Benji reached for his keyring. 10 minutes later, the back gate unlatched with a low metallic click. Isolde waited behind the shed, cloaked in rags. She looked at Takoa, then at the dark tree line. Her eyes brimmed with a fear that had calcified over years. But when he offered his hand, she took it. They didn't run. They moved like whispers, barefoot over frozen mud, snowflakes spinning around them. They didn't speak until they reached the trees. And then Isolde collapsed. Her knees hit the snow hard. Lena, panting from the sprint, dropped beside her. She wrapped her arms around her mother, sobbing into her shoulder. I found you, Lena wept. I found you, Mama. Takoa stood just behind them, silent, hands curled into fists at his sides. The moon broke through the clouds above, casting light on three figures huddled beneath a pine's shadow. They built a shelter of branches and hide that night, tucked deep into the woods. Later, after Isolde slept, Lena sat beside Takoa near the fire. Her eyes shone with tears and exhaustion, but something else too, peace. She leaned her head against his arm. What should I call you now? She asked softly. Takoa looked down, his heart beating unevenly. Whatever feels true to you. She was quiet a long time, then whispered with a smile, Snowfather. He turned to her. Snowfather, the one who carried me from the coldest sleep. Takoa stared into the fire. The name settled in his bones like warmth. Not from blood, not from duty, but from something deeper, chosen. He placed his arm gently around her shoulders, pulled her closer, and in the silence, he whispered back, Then Snowfather I'll be. Spring arrived not as a shout, but a whisper. The snow didn't vanish. It softened. The trees didn't bloom. They breathed, slowly, gently, as if afraid to believe the cold was truly gone. In a small clearing just beyond the edge of the forest, Takoa, Isolde, and Lena began to build. It wasn't grand, just 2 rooms and a low stone hearth, but every log they cut, every nail they drove, was laid with hands that had known loss and chose life anyway. Takoa carved the beams himself, shaping them with steady care. Isolde lined the walls with bundles of dried herbs, sage, chamomile, wild yarrow, each tied with string and a small prayer. Lena helped mix mud for the chinking, her laughter returning in sudden bursts, like birds startled from a bush. There were no plans, no blueprints, only memory and love, quiet but unshakable. Each day brought new tasks. Each evening brought rest. Isolde taught Lena how to knead dough from root flour and grain they milled by hand. She showed her how to taste with the back of a spoon, how to check the fire's heat with her palm. Takoa showed Lena how to follow animal tracks in soft dirt, how to listen to the forest breathing. He carved small figures from cedar, owl, fox, rabbit, and left them near her bed, one at a time, like gifts from the woods themselves. And at night, when the stars blinked awake above the chimney smoke, They sat by the fire. Lena practiced writing on pieces of birch bark, carefully spelling Mama, Snowfather, Home. Sometimes she'd pause, charcoal in hand, and whisper the words like spells, binding this place to her spirit. There were no walls hung with portraits, no silver, no lace, but there was warmth, bread, laughter, the smell of pine and stew. And slowly the ghost began to leave. It was just after sunrise when Lena found him. She had gone to the stream alone, carrying a basket to collect moss and smooth stones for the hearth. The mist clung low to the ground, and the air smelled of wet bark and thawing earth. That's when she saw the bundle beneath a hollow log, a child, no older than 4, curled into himself like a leaf pressed by snow. His clothes were torn, his lips pale, his small hands wrapped around a frozen apple. He didn't cry. He didn't move, just blinked up at her with eyes far too quiet for someone so young. Lena dropped to her knees. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're not alone now." She carried him back in her arms, limbs trembling from the weight, not of his body, but of memory. She remembered too well what it meant to be left behind. Isolde knelt the moment she saw them, wrapping the boy in her shawl without a word. Her arms shook, not from fear, but from something older, a familiar ache. Takoa stood at the cabin threshold, watching. He didn't speak, but his hand found Lena's shoulder, grounding her. They named the boy Milo, for the soot that still clung to his skin, for the fire he had outlasted. That night, Isolde made warm porridge with honey and root mash. Lena helped Milo hold a spoon, guiding his tiny fingers. Takoa carved a small bird from cedar and hung it by the window above the child's bed, its wings outstretched in flight. The home, once built for 3, stretched quietly to hold 4. They made space at the table. Another bowl, another place beside the fire, another heart among them. Milo didn't speak for days. Then one evening, as snow tapped gently on the roof, he pointed to the carving on the doorframe and asked, "What does it say?" Lena smiled. "It says a snow may cover blood, but it cannot bury kin." He didn't understand the words, not yet, but he nodded anyway and reached for her hand. And just like that, the family grew, not by blood, not by plan, but by choice, and by love that refused to leave anyone behind. The sun was soft that evening, spilling gold over the treetops, casting long shadows across the clearing. Wildflowers dotted the hillside, bending gently in the breeze. The air held the warmth of spring, and something deeper still, peace. Takoa, Isolde, Lena, and little Milo stood together at the top of the hill behind their cabin. From there, the whole valley stretched beneath them, the winding river, the pine-lined path, the garden plot below, where rows of green had begun to break through the soil. Lena looked out, eyes focused on the trail that disappeared into the trees. "This is the road," she said quietly, "the one they left me on." Isolde's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around Lena's hand. Takoa said nothing. He stared into the distance, eyes steady, unreadable. Lena turned toward them and smiled. "But now," she continued, "it's the path that brought me home." Milo leaned against her leg, thumb in his mouth, watching the sky as if trying to memorize the shape of safety. Takoa crouched down and pulled both children close, resting a strong, weathered hand on each of their backs. He didn't answer, but his presence said enough. In that moment, under the open sky, surrounded by earth that now remembered laughter instead of loss, they stood not as fragments of what was broken, but as something whole, a family, not by blood alone, but by choice, by fire and forgiveness, by the hands that carried, the arms that held, and the hearts that refused to give up. Below them, smoke rose gently from the chimney. Behind them, a cabin built from survival and hope stood strong beneath the trees. And carved deep into the beam above its door, weathered by rain and time, were the words Takoa had etched by firelight. "Snow may cover blood, but it cannot bury kin." The wind picked up, soft and kind, rustling the tall grass like a lullaby. And for the first time in a long time, the world no longer asked them to run, or hide, or fight. It simply let them stay. Some stories end in fire, others in silence. But the best ones end in choosing to stay. Tekoa could have walked away, again. Isolde could have let bitterness win. And Lena, she could have given up on being found. But they didn't. And maybe that's the lesson we need now more than ever. Because in today's world, full of fast goodbyes, broken families, and fear disguised as strength, this quiet, snowy story reminds us that love is not always loud. Sometimes it's a bowl of soup, a carved toy, a hand that stays. It's choosing someone. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And maybe there's a part of you that needed to hear that tonight. Maybe you've been left behind once. Or maybe you're the one carrying someone else through the snow. Either way, you're not alone. We'd love to know, what moment in this story touched you most? Have you ever been a snow father to someone? Do you believe family can be chosen, not just inherited? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what love means when the world goes quiet. Thank you for walking through this story with us. If it stirred something in your heart, please tap like, and don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales that honor the quiet strength in all of us. Because some stories history forgets, but the heart remembers.